Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of the LitRPG Podcast. I'm Ramon Mejia, here to bring you the latest LitRPG news, reviews, and of course author interviews. Episode number 241 of the show this week. I got some nice reviews for you, 4 from me, additional 3 from our correspondent Ian Mitchell. And this week that's going to include my review on the Small Unit Tactics, volume number 1, which is a Russian translation story. You'll see how that turned out. Also, Path to Villainy, a shorter tale from S.L. Rowland. Also, Intellectum, actually came out a little bit ago, but this is another Russian translation for you to enjoy, or not, we'll see. Also out, though, I'll be doing a review of FFF-Class Trashero, which is an online webcomic. So there you go. But in addition to that, we're also going to be getting some reading off some reviews rather from our correspondent Ian Mitchell, who sent us some nice reviews for Reincarnation, also Shadowbound, and Burning Core, the last 2 from the same author, Gage Lee. So we'll see how those turn out. Before we get into any of that stuff, we're going to go into LitRPG news. Okay, this week we're going to start off on a sad note. We got more plagiarized stories. It's a constant battle with these things, I got to tell you. And it seems like a lot of these are coming from the same group. I have nine, that's right, confirmed 9 that I found online just between last week and this for these plagiarized stories that are being stolen from online places like web novels or Royal Road. And they're just being thrown up with some very generalized fantasy covers and some titles. Some of them even inside the internal text, they own the copyright to these titles, even though they obviously don't if they're put up on Kindle Unlimited and also on web places. And a very common name among these is it says published by James Grayson. So it's like that's a big indicator in all these novels that this is obviously not legitimate stuff. So I'm going to read off a list to you here, and hopefully if you come across these titles, don't read them. Don't give these people money, especially if they're stealing from obviously people who've actually written these stories, even if they're stories online or abandoned. These people are stealing them, literally just copying, pasting the text and publishing on Amazon and trying to remain undiscovered until they get paid. So if you see them, report it. If you see these titles, feel free to report that Amazon as being plagiarized, or hopefully just leave a review saying that they are, so we can warn other readers that is the case. Starting off this week, it's going to be Domination Online, which is a stolen version of the story called World Dominion System. And of course, with all the links in the show notes, I'm going to be also linking to the original titles, whether it's on web novels or on Railroad or wherever. So you can actually read these stories there if you're really interested in these titles, and you can give support to the authors in those locations so that the actual authors get funds, money, or whatever the case is. Also out right now is Next World Online, which is a stolen story called New Life on the Rural Road. The Final Primal is a stolen story called The Last Primal. You'll see the very similar titles, which is also part of the marketing scheme of getting people to think that their favorite online stories are being published, and so they get them to read them on Kindle Unlimited, and people just take the money. Also out is Forest King, which is a stolen version of the story The Forest Emperor, found on the Royal Road. Also Dungeon Stars, which is a plagiarized version of Dungeon and Stars, found on the Royal Road. Micah's Quest. This one was a little bit less clear whether it was plagiarized or not. I found the name associated with the story and the exact same title there online. It's published under the same name as Dre Grayson as the others on the list, which was a huge indicator that this is a plagiarized story. Eventually, I did find it on the Royal Road as Where Did My Pen Go? It's a kind of a long title, but it doesn't have original cover art for that story. But this is very much a stolen story from there as well. Also, The Invisible Hero. This one was a little bit more clever, even though it's from the same group or the same person who's ripping off these abandoned stories online and published them. The author doesn't actually, the person who copy and pasted this was so lazy that they actually copy and pasted the original author's name with the text, where it's like, oh, this title of the story, The Invisible Hero, written by, I think it's Cypher something on the Railroad, and then all the text. And they were just so lazy that they even ended up copying and pasting the Railroad story link in the text there, which was a big like, is this plagiarized or not? But when I looked it up, it was, this is the name of the author, Ethan Derricks, on this title. Has already been confirmed as somebody who's plagiarizing other stories. If you just click on the title, the author name, you'll see another story called Hero's Quest, which is also a plagiarized road story that other readers have already located and posted about in the reviews. So this is another one. And again, it links the original story. It's called The Invincible Hero, not just Invincible Hero. And another one is Wizard's Tale on Amazon, which is actually a translated story in web novels, which is called A Wizard's Secret. And I think we have one more. Yeah, one more. The Prime Gamer is a solely for web novels of the story Prime Originator. And again, remember, we have links in the show notes for all these to show that they are actually plagiarized without the author's consent. And again, a lot of these seem to be the same group or the same individual who's posting the same similar text in the forward section thing by the same author, published by the same company. But they also are heading there trying to claim, in some of these cases, copyright under these false authors' names. So there you go. Just be aware that these are huge plagiarized stories. Please don't give them your money or your Kindle Unlimited reads. Okay, on to some more exciting news. We have Jeff Sproul, who's the author of Permadeath Legacy and also Sigil Online series. His first solo developed game is out for you to enjoy on Steam. It's called Lost Remnant: The End Tides. It's released. It's a free-to-play game, so please go check it out. Where I try to support our LitRPG authors, or our favorite LitRPG authors, other endeavors. I know Drift Fucking Log has also been working on a side-scroller based on his Slime Dinner Chronicle series, which I'm still excited to play and to pay for at some point. And in this case, you can actually get this point-and-click adventure title now. Go on Steam. We'll link in the show notes. Again, it's called Lost Remnant: The End Tides, and the author describes it as, it's a free, mysterious point-and-click adventure with some cosmic horror undertones. So that's how the author, in this case, game designer, is describing it. So go check it out. And he said, if you enjoyed, please leave a review. It'll really help him. And again, we've linked the show notes for you. If you want to, you just click on it and go check it out. And if you have Steam. In other LitRPG news, we have, this is personal, sorry. The Mechanical Crafter Book 1, which was a huge hit when I published a few months ago. Amazon picked it up for a Kindle Big Deal thing. Which I guess is a promotional thing. And I've heard from other LitRPG authors that a lot of LitRPG authors have actually gotten the same kind of promotional opportunity from Amazon recently, specifically for LitRPG titles. So, this is totally hypothetical. This Kindle deal this Kindle Big Deal is running for September the 1st through September the 6th for the Mechanical Crafter Book number 1 for 99 cents, basically. And it's really good for authors, of course, in that they're getting a lot of free promotion, hopefully bleed through to the rest of the series or the rest of their titles, which is nice for us, but also good for readers who are getting a discounted title. But I think Amazon might be doing a LitRPG deal for LitRPG titles in September. So to keep an eye out for other promotional stuff from authors around the same time frame, hopefully, for their LitRPG stuff. And we'll let you know if we see anything else, or if other authors let us know if there's a way you can get a good deal on their stuff and also support your favorite authors. Link in the show notes, of course, if you want to go check that out on September the 1st to, again, September the 6th. We can get that nice, sweet, discounted title for 99 cents. Speaking of discounted titles, Death's Mantle 3 is out now, written by Herman Cooper. The audiobook version is out currently, and to celebrate the complete trilogy, the author is actually practically giving away all the books. The first book is free currently. The second book in the series is 99 cents. And as of this posting of the podcast, the third book is 99 cents. So you can actually get all three of these titles. And then, they're pretty good sized, for a couple bucks, United States dollars. And if you wish to, you can also, of course, pick up the audiobook versions. The Amazon usually discounts titles if you've already purchased them for the audiobook versions. So that might be another way for you to get a less costly version. But of course, if you have nice credits from Audible, feel free to spend those too. This is a fun series, and it's actually an award-winning series. They got the Earphone Award, Andrew Parsonage for for the title. So it's a very well told audiobook as well. I really enjoyed it. I thought the first book was great. I didn't continue reading book 2 and 3. I just got busy and I forgot about it. But a lot of people really enjoyed them, and the audiobook versions done by Andrea she's an amazing narrator. So there you go. On to stuff that is out now. Haven't had a chance to read it. It's come out last week. I'm letting you know that it exists, including The System, The Multiverse, book number 2. I enjoyed book number 1, but, okay. Also out is The War of Gods, Dungeon of Perdition, book number 4. Also out is Dream Stream Reality. And the 4th book in the Rebel and Jack series, which is a fan favorite. Also out is Pre-Souls Apocalypse Rewind, a grimdark fantasy LitRPG series, Pre-Souls Apocalypse book number 1, which is actually doing amazingly well on Amazon for coming from an author who's only done, I think, one other title as a LitRPG. He might have an existing fan base, but I enjoyed his other title, so this one might be has obviously following. So congratulations to James T. Callum. Also out is the 7th and last book in the Arcane Kingdom Online series by Jacob Tanner, called The World Outside. It's available for you to enjoy right now. Also out is Omens, The Ashen Plain, book number 2. Also out is Scourge World Conquest, book number 2. Also it is Discovery Hall of Heroes. Not the best cover, but still, it's out for you to enjoy. We'll see how it turns out. Also it is The Life System, The Origin Story. And last but not least is Eldritch Rebirth, New Dawn. So there we go. A bunch of stuff that's out for you to enjoy. On to new LitRPG audiobooks. We already mentioned Death Mantle, book number 3 is out for you to enjoy. Also out there was Dose of Chaos, Prime Verse, book number 2. And also is Respawn, book number 4, called The Nightmare Mode. The 4th book of the Inora Online series is out as an audiobook. And Echo Online, book number 2 is out for you to enjoy as well. Okay, on to stuff that's coming out in the near future. I'm just reading up a bunch of stuff for you to enjoy, but it's kind of a nice way to plan your reading schedule if you have to save up money for whatever reasons, or if you're an author who's thinking about when to publish their stuff. This is also a nice list to be aware of, so you know, like when a bunch of stuff is coming out, or if a big name title is coming out, you can decide whether you want to publish at the same day as that. That's up to you. Aether's Guard, Aether Survival, book number 2 is going to be out September the 2nd. This is titled by Daniel Schinofen. First book was really good. I enjoyed it. I think I gave it an 8 out of 10. It was so enjoyable. Book number 2 is going to be out on September the 2nd. September the 4th is going to be Holy War, Discardian, book number 5. September the 8th is going to be The Snake's Path, A Snake's Life, book number 2, which is a monster evolution story, published by Shadow Alley Press, I believe. Also out on September the 9th is going to be Something, Full Murder Hobo, book number 1. That's literally the title. It's written by Dakota Kraut. Very well-known author, favorite of mine, and I'm looking forward to seeing what this actually is going to be. So, yeah. Also out on September the 9th is going to be Dungeon Worlds, a Reborn Online series. On September the 15th, it's going to be Stolen Lives. On September the 16th, The Guild Core, book number 1, Dragonborn. On September the 18th, the 3rd book in the Olympus Reborn series. September 21st is going to be Labyrinth Tartarus. On September 29th, Tycoon, Trudging into the Path of a Modest Life in a Fantasy World, a Fantasy Liberty series, book number 2. The first book I think came out last year. I'm like, I don't recall this series at all because it came out like a year ago. September the 30th is going to be the 4th book in the Gods Game series. October the 1st is going to be Seize the Day, the 5th book in the Bad Guys series. I love Eric Uglin for no other reason than like the amazingly punny titles that he puts out. So he'll always have a special place in my heart, even if I'm not a fan of the Bad Guys series necessarily. I love his titles and I love the Good Guys series a lot. Legends Online, book number 7 is going to be out on October the 1st. October the 2nd is going to be Dungeon Crawler Carl, and I want you to notice that the author actually changed his cover art to something even more inappropriate. The last cover was apparently just too tame, so he had to change it to a dude in his underwear getting crawled upon by tentacles in front of a door. So I'm like, yeah, okay, that sounds like man. I mean, there you go. On October the 6th, it'll be Watcher's Fate, the third book in the Life in Exile series. October the 7th, it'll be In the System, City of Goblins. October the 26th, it'll be Underdog book number 4. October 27th, Eternal Online book number 3. And November 23rd, Quest for the Ember Relic. So there you go, all the stuff that now it's coming out in the near future. So there you go, on to new releases and reviews. Okay, first review of the week is going to be Small Unit Tactics Volume 1, written by Alexander Romanoff. It is 307 pages, $3.99. It's available on Kindle Unlimited, and here's the author's description. A strange foreign world, mysterious judges with capricious rules, thousands of gamers find themselves split into factions and pitted against each other at the whim of an unknown higher power with no idea how they got there or why they were chosen. Dying in this world hurts, and it's not the end. Dead players always respawn to fight again. Echo, with his extensive knowledge of fighting, armor, and weapons, has all the markings of a great leader. The ragtag recruits fighting for him under the less than threatening name Society of Printbrick Enthusiasts become the bane of the opposing factions, sowing terror in their wake. But this game won't be won in straightforward skirmishes. The squad will have to forge pacts with their own faction, the judges, and even their enemies. Each day brings new twists, new rules, and new ways to play. And a step that seemed to be in the right direction might suddenly become a fatal mistake. Brute force and bravado won't be enough for Echo to carve his way to the top and stay there. He will have to lead his squad through mistakes, good fortune, victory, and defeat in his quest to secure his position. So there we go. Full disclosure, I received advance copy for review. I purchased a copy when it became available. Right off the bat, I gotta say that this is weird. I mean, this story is formatted very weirdly, and there's some very unusual artistic choices. I think part of the description that was given to me was that this is described as an artistic take, an artistic difference in telling of a story, and I can absolutely see that that might be the case. For me, though, there were some early issues in the story that I could see would stop other readers from just continuing on at all. The beginning of the story is kind of unclear about what's happening or why. I think the novel description does a pretty decent job of kind of telling you as a reader what to expect, but I often don't read the novel description other than to see if it says LitRPG personally. And so when I read the story, I was like, oh, there's no real clear description literally of like what's happening in like the first few scenes of this book. And kind of, if you've read enough LitRPG, like, oh, okay, this is transported to a game world and there's something to do here. And that's kind of what the experience that I went through in the first few, I'm going to call them scenes for now, and I'll get to a reason why in a little bit, in the first scenes of the story. And the story itself is told in an unusual way, which you're going to talk about in a second. However, if you can adjust to that style of storytelling in the story, in this novel, and you're going to find something I think you're going to enjoy if you like action stories, if you like stories that focus on like a tactical combat styling for small group unit fights. I think this novel does a really good job of describing those fights. In addition to that, there's also like a very nicely either research or personal experience, historical weapons, armor, and again, like player versus player and small group fighting that I think is kind of going to be the highlights, right? Like the title, Small Unit Tactics, is telling the best part of the story, to be honest. So first of all, the thing is that might not work for some readers. The biggest thing is probably going to be how the story is told. Instead of the traditional chapter format with like clear beginnings, middles, ends, and like transitional statements between chapters or scenes, this story is told in slides. I mean, like literally in the directory, the index, I forget the name. It says actually, it will say slides 1 through 10 or something, and then the next one slides 11 through 20, or whatever the case is. And these slides are kind of like these snapshots of either the main character's internal dialogue, his thoughts, dialogue between characters, or events. And sometimes these slides are like a few pages long, or like 10 pages, and other times they're just literally 2 paragraphs, and then you go to the next slide. And so it was a different way to kind of tell the story. There's again no like real connective tissue of text between these slides. So there's really just like these jumps in timelines, jumps in thoughts, and these scenes that may skip hours or even days in the story. And it was just kind of a big adjustment for my brain to adjust to that storytelling format. And again, it's very clearly an intentional artistic choice. And if you can adjust to it, like I said, I think you'll enjoy the story if you like, good action scenes and fighting and combat stuff. On the story side of things, the beginning again was a little bit annoying. It had a good enough action to start, but again, there's just like a confusion about what's happening in the story. And part of that is the fact that the main character is kind of an unreliable narrator, and the fact that he doesn't really know what's happening. And his statements are given as factual statements, like, oh, nobody ever dies. These watchers are NPCs, and that violence isn't allowed inside the city. And none of that is actually shown in the story, in the beginning of the story, rather. As the story continues on, like 10, 15, 20%, these facts become clear through the actual observations of the main character, that they are true or not. And sometimes they're not true. But again, in those first sections of the story, in those first scenes, the statements like, "Oh, we live forever," or "we can't die." I'm like, how do you know that? You haven't stated anything in this chapter or this scene that is the case. You're just making blanket statements without any either nothing supporting that in the story, or no experiences given in the story either that's the case. And so it was a little bit annoying in that case. But again, about the 11% mark of the story, the main character starts to recount his own experiences, that he tried to kill himself and he couldn't die. He just respawned, or that other events happen. And the storytelling just becomes a little more clear about what's happening in the story, that this is a transported to this game mode story. And they're all being forced into like this player versus player, faction versus faction system of fighting and combat. And once it gets to that point where you're being introduced to these larger concepts and these bigger action scenes, the story really does get good. But again, it takes a little bit to get there. And so if you don't enjoy the storytelling, the way it's told, or the beginning of the story, I think that a lot of people won't push past that beginning section to kind of get to those better portions of the story. About 20% of the story is when you really get to the factional fighting, which I think is the better part of the story. Because once you get there, you're like, oh, this is kind of like a battle royale story in a sense. It's really faction versus faction fighting, but you get a little bit more detail about the world history, the 6 factions that these kidnapped players are forced to fight in. And you get some actual like larger scale player versus player, faction versus faction fighting, and the story pace really does pick up, where it's like bam, 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 action, training, and some good elements there. Game mechanic wise, it's technical RPG. There are levels. It's a little more muted on that, and how much experience you're getting per fight or per kill is a little ambiguous, but the main character and all the characters do grow in power through a level system. And as they level, they get the ability to choose RPG upgrades and bonuses and stuff to their percent bonus to their strength, or to like a special abilities, whatever the case is. So there is an RPG element. This is LitRPG, but again, it's a little more muted in favor of describing the realistic combat scenes, the realistic way that melee weapons and armors exist, different types, and these are historical references, and the main character talks about the differences between them and how they be used, and what are some good tactics in using them and training different types of weapons and armor for new people who are into melee versus veterans who are part of like HEMA or whatever. And there are other rules are established, like ranged weapons don't exist in the story. And even if you throw like a spear, it doesn't hurt anybody, because one of the game rules is death can only come from a weapon held in your enemy's hands. So there very much are actual game mechanic elements to the story, and rewards and death sets, of course. So those are the game mechanics. But again, the bigger emphasis is on the battle royale type of action combat stuff. The big draw for me, hands down, the fighting. Once it got to the fighting, once it got to like the realistic historic use of these particularly named weapons and fighting styles and armor types, and how like people would shoot things for just looks, like they're gamers. Like everyone who gets kidnapped is a gamer, and gamers are choosing based on looks or what they think is going to be cool versus what is realistically going to be a usable weapon or armor. And the main character kind of whips their butts. It's really an entertaining story from that point on. Overall, again, if you can get past the formatting of the story, and again, it is a particular style, and kind of the unclear start, it's an entertaining story for those people who like player versus player and faction versus faction fighting. It's going to get like a slightly lower score for me. Most of that is because of the harsh beginning, and there are other reviews, so I'm sure you're going to be like, I couldn't get past the first few chapters because of this issue. But for me, I pushed past it, and that's just how my brain works. I was able to adjust and just enjoy what exists versus what I wish existed. But even for me, I had a hard time sometimes. To get the score was 7.2 out of 10. That's Small Unit Tactics Volume 1, a LitRPG series, with the score 7.2 out of 10, which is still a good review score from me. Okay, next up is Path to Villainy, an NPC Kobold's Tale, written by S.L. Rowland. This is 175 pages, a little on the shorter end for LitRPG. It's $2.99, so it's reasonably priced. It is available on Kindle Unlimited. Here's the author's description. Villains aren't born, they're made. Wit was an ordinary NPC, a non-player character in a video game. As a kobold skald, he sang songs to empower heroes before they entered the local dungeons. Every day was a fresh start. Every day, Wit woke with no memory of his previous encounters with all those so-called heroes, and every day he forgot the countless beatings and deaths he took at the hands of the murder hobos he valiantly buffed. But when all those memories suddenly come flooding back, he only wants one thing. And I don't think I'm not sure if that's an incomplete sentence there or I forgot to copy it. So sorry, S.L. Rowland. S.L. Rowland is also the author of the Sentence Trashero series, so I'm a fan of that one. I'll be honest, the cover art on this novel does not do the story justice. You just see a kobold with like a lute, and that's it. And this story is actually much cooler than the cover art. Not a bad cover art. It just doesn't do it justice of what's happening in this story. It doesn't really convey like the cool villain aspect of this story. So if you thought of skipping because the cover didn't to you, look past it. Just go give it a read. It's a short enough story that you won't have a lot of time to. It's a real tight story, so it kind of gets to the point real quick. The main character is an NPC kobold that busts adventures for you in a dungeon, and again, just like the novel description said, he's murdered and he's abused by players on a daily basis. But every day, whether he's killed or just goes to bed, he forgets about all those events. His memory is literally erased or suppressed. And one day something happens that forces him to remember. He suddenly gets flooded with all those memories of that abuse. And that turns him into a villain, or at least somebody who wants revenge. And eventually he's offered like this quest line to become an actual villain in this MMO game world. And that's essentially the premise of the story, like how this below level skald kobolds, and kobolds are considered, trash monsters, it goes on a path of revenge, and he starts incorporating the other kobolds in this kobold town. And it's a really enjoyable story. And that's kind of what it is. I really did like the idea of the NPC character becoming a self-aware and becoming a villain. And it's fun to see how that character use these new game mechanics and his barbarian kind of class that's called to take his revenge and kill a bunch of players and the benefits to himself, and also how there's a little bit of town building with the other kobolds and a bunch of like cool little action adventure stuff. But again, the story is like pretty tight as far as like its storytelling and pacing, which I personally thought it could have been stretched out a little bit more to like maybe 250 pages, with just a little more world building fleshing out, or like secondary or tertiary character development interactions. But as even at 175, it's a very entertaining story. It just gets to the events quickly. And for some people that might be great. Some people might think it's a little short. In the LitRPG genre in general, 170 pages is considered something on the short story side, which may be good for some people, may not be. But for me, I enjoy it still. On the RPG side of things, the story is good. There's plenty of RPG stuff once you get past the beginning section of the story. The beginning section is the main character is unaware that he's an NPC and he's just going about his business. So you don't see a lot of RPG stuff until about past the 15% mark, when the main character gets access to character sheets, stat sheets, kill stuff, and he gets the ability to gain experience points from hunting monsters or players, and you get a bunch of progression stuff there. And also, I really enjoyed the villain mechanic that was developed with the story. I think that's a nice way to actually incorporate being a villain in the story and giving an RPG mechanics without making it too overpowered, and giving the main character an RPG reason to kill players as an NPC, but also giving him like a very reasonable detriment to being killed by players himself. So not a very nice balance to that particular system. Overall, I enjoyed the heck out of it. It's a shorter story again for a lot of readers, but still I think it's well worth your time to read. Give it a score of 7.5 out of 10. That's Path to Villainy, an NPC Kobold's Tale with a score of about 7.5 out of 10. Okay, next up is Intellectum, written by Valerie Starsky. It is 237 pages, $3.99. It's available on Kindle Unlimited. Here's the author's description. They say God created the earth in 6 days. Highly advanced invaders calling themselves admins destroyed Earth's civilization and part of its biosphere in a single day. People had always considered their minerals to be the most valuable material on Earth. They quickly learned how wrong they'd been. People turned out to be the most valuable material, or rather the substance that could be produced from them. Intellectum was a liquid so potent that a drop of it could bestow any creature or thing with sentience. It could make all sorts of objects smart, strong, and infuse them with magic. The admins gave the 300 million survivors a slim chance to improve their lot in life through the global game. Though the Earthlings were supposed to breed in special farms in order to produce more Intellectum, at least they hadn't been deprived of the right to fight back. Okay, part of that premise is a little bit unclear in the story, which is part of the issue for me in this novel. This is an RPG apocalypse story that's translated from Russian, and other reviews of the story have already mentioned this. It has some translation and editing issues. Personally, I've read worse translations. I've read stuff online where it's barely cobbled together words that are technically-ish. This does better than that. The words in this story are all accurately translated. There is kind of an issue with the editing side of it, in that even though the words in the sentence are technically correct, understanding them was sometimes a challenge because they're phrased so oddly or in a specific way where it's like it doesn't make sense to me. You have to stop and think about it, which absolutely ruins the flow of the story in the early chapters of this novel, or for at least almost half of this novel, I would say. The story is, the author actually does a pretty decent job of giving the novel description. The main character is a person who's lost his use of his legs in a childhood crash. He grows up in a catastrophe. The RPG apocalypse hits, and he gets the use of his legs back, and he gets an RPG interface. And he's, for some unspecified reason, chosen by these other factions in the universe to get these huge special bonuses that not only fix his mind, but also give him a warrior class and some special items that give him a huge boost against the admins, which is the big bad alien faction that had instituted the RPG apocalypse in the world and transported these monsters there. So that's essentially the premise. The main character has this boost, but he also has this weird way of hiding from the admins, or at least hiding his levels. And he goes on this slice of life, I want to say adventure, but this journey of increasing his power, kind of creating his own human faction, and kind of fighting against the admins, or at least the people that are sent to capture and kill him. That's essentially kind of what the premise of the story is. There's a lot of things I'm omitting because if you want to read it, I don't want to spoil it for you. That's kind of what it is. On the game mechanics side of things, fairly standard stuff, nothing super outstanding. The RPG apocalypse story, stats, level, skills, special abilities, notifications, XP for monsters. Nothing too special. I think the one unique thing is the main character's a few of his abilities. He's a gunsmith. He can enchant weapons. He can create weapons. There's a little bit of crafting here, but not a lot. Yeah, and some of his bonuses are very unique to this world, but not unusual for these types of stories. Onto the issues with the story. The biggest one, again, is the translation parts. It stopped me from really understanding clearly what was happening in the story in the beginning portion of this novel. It was sometimes very unclear and very confusing. Some of the reviews were like, I read 2 chapters of this and I had to stop reading because I could not understand what's happening. And sometimes there were just events in the story that I think could have been really cool, except that I didn't understand what was happening. Like at one point, a a random person shows up to arrest the main character for using a forbidden artifact. Then monsters kill that dude, and then the main character is arrested, but then he's pardoned by a judge who then self-destructs. And I'm like, what? And that was very much a common refrain in like the beginning parts of this story, and within like the first 30-40% of this novel. Other issues for me personally are the fact that the main character gets a bunch of levels and powers and abilities that it doesn't actually earn. Like it by the 15% mark in the story, the main character really just kind of goes from level 1-2 to level 55. For no other reason than he's using these gifts that are spoken of in like the very opening of the story. And he's literally given both by the normal system, by the gifts he gets, like these powers. And it's unclear why he's getting these gifts. I mean, having read the entire thing, I can kind of guess about it. But it's nothing that he's really deserved or earned. And so for me, that was kind of an issue of like, this main character is overpowered, but he's not earned this power, and he's moderately using it, and he's kind of falling into all these successes, not through necessarily intelligence, but often as a low luck. It wasn't really an enjoyable aspect of the story for me. I liked the powers. The powers were kind of cool. Some of the fights were decent enough. And as the story continued on, you can see where the story is potentially going in maybe book 2 or something. And there are potentialities for it being a really enjoyable story. But again, as it is, it didn't really work for me. There were other issues, of course. It was just kind of decent. It was kind of a little bit lackluster most of the time. And also, it was just a challenge for my brain to read this occasionally in the story. Eventually, again, at about the 40% mark, the translation and editing does get better. I don't want you to think that, again, the entire novel is full of like translation errors or bad editing. That's not the case. They're just like regular issues in the beginning portion of it. Again, at about the 40% mark, when the novel kind of seems to focus on the main character and his survival and exploring powers, and these sections where he's essentially talking to himself, or describing just what he's doing, those sections are a lot better translated. I think that's because it's simple. It's simple what he's doing. It's not overly complex. It's not talking about factions or pop culture references or whatever the case is. It's just him exploring what his power is doing, or what him fighting a particular enemy, or looking around for other survivors and doing simple dialogue with them. And again, past that 40% mark, the translation editing stuff does get better. But by that, I'm like, I could see that why a lot of people would kind of not get to that point. It's so far in. And again, the other issues that his success kind of simming forward and doesn't change at that point. It continues the entire story. So there's still other issues that continue on. For me, it just didn't work. I generally really enjoy RPG apocalypse stories. Like, they're one of my favorite kind of subgenres within LitRPG, because they combine two genres that I really like, apocalypse and RPG. But in this case, it did not work for me. There's just too much of the early part of the story that was really confusing because, again, translation editing issues. And so I'm going to give a score 6 out of 10. Again, not necessarily a bad review score. It's just that it didn't work for me. Other reviewers gave it much less kind review scores, and that's perfectly fine. A lot of people are just not going to like this because they're not going to be able to understand what's happening in the first sections. They're going to give up on it, which is perfectly understandable. For me, I went through the entire thing, and even I was like, oh, by the end I was like, oh, I guess some of it is okay. The beginning wasn't great though, so it gets a score of 6 out of 10. So that's Intellectum with a score of, again, 6 out of 10. And next up is FFF-Class Trashero. I can't actually read the author's original name. It is 52 chapters. It is free on the internet. I'm reading the online webcomic version of it. There's no English publisher yet, so you can look for it online yourself. I have a link in the show notes to a particular translator. But again, there are other versions of it on the internet. Nobody has an English licensing claim on it yet. Here's the author's description. Protagonist King Hung-Soo, who killed the Demon King after 10 years of being summoned in a fantasy world. Now it's time to be sent back to Earth. What's this? The fantasy world god appeared alongside his report card because he removed all the obstacles that prevented him from killing the Demon King. His personality score came out as an F. The regression that follows is that he has to return to the start and begin again. Can King Hung-Soo end this endless returns? And the regression portion of the story is referring to when somebody goes back in time and kind of relives their life over, only having foreknowledge of the future, so they can potentially change things if they want. And that's part of what the jewel of the story is, I think. This is a twist on the summon to a fantasy world kind of idea. The summon to fantasy world to defeat the Demon King trope. That's very common for portal fiction. This is definitely playing around with it and making fun of it and doing some really neat kind of fun things. The main character is kind of an anti-hero who defeated the Demon King like he was supposed to. But because of how he did it along the way in betraying and murdering his companions because they were getting in his way, finally getting tired of them, he's actually sent back in time to the first day he was summoned there, and he's supposed to learn some lesson in treating his companions well. But he has foreknowledge of like all the things that happened in his life in like the 10 or 15 years or whatever it was that he had lived there previously. And so he knows about all like the dirty secrets of people, and he knows all the quests that he went on that may not have been worth his time. And he knows all the different ways to power level. And it was just kind of a fun story to see him use that foreknowledge to try to defeat or become powerful enough to defeat the king again, even in even shorter time. So instead of wasting 10 years on a bunch of like side quests or quests that were supposed to like help the kingdom defeat, cultists or whatever, he decides to do things differently. And he's constantly reminded in the story of like, oh, the reason you were sent back the first time is because you scored an F on your personality test side of your review score. You did great in the Demon King style, but you were such a jerk to people and you did so many terrible murder hobo things that they're making you do it again. And it's just kind of this fun, irreverent kind of story of like him doing these things and using his foreknowledge to become super overpowered. But it's still kind of a fun thing because he's also nagged on the choices he's making potentially, but he's reasoning it out himself as like this amoral character. Like, well, if I murder all the cultists in advance or something, then they're not going to be able to like spread their cultism or like kidnap children or whatever they're doing. I'm just making that part up, but that's kind of the mentality he has in this story. And it's like I said, it's super enjoyable. I had a good time with it. I'm giving this score a 7.3 before I continue on. I want to make sure I show you the artwork. The artwork is like really nice. It's really clean line work, nice fill and stuff. So I'm just going to scroll through just like a few of the chapters for the folks who are watching the video version of the podcast. They can see the artwork is pretty enjoyable on its own as well. But again, there's a super irreverent tone about like the main character knowing he has to kill the Demon King, and so that's his goal instead of how he does it, which is he's unaware that he was being graded on the entire time, and so being a murder hobo wasn't the best way to do it. And it's kind of this fun journey of like, how is he going to change this time, or how are the judges going to switch things around and make him do things differently? And it's kind of that those stories real antagonists, not necessarily the evil demon lord or wherever the case is. So there you go. So for me, it gets score 7.3 out of 10. I had a good time with it. I've been reading some of these online web novels recently, and so I'm just going to be reviewing one a week, even though I'm burning through like 2 or 3 a week. So I have them listed in advance for you guys. Okay, there we go, and that's the reviews for FFF-Class Trashero. And next up is Iron's Picks of the Week. This is a segment from, we have a contributor, Ian Mitchell, who is a longtime LitRPG community member who reads and reviews as much as I do. And he was nice enough to help with the podcast and send in reviews just so we can have more stuff for you to listen to. And I've always trusted his opinion. And he does read different things than me, as is shown in this particular episode of the podcast, and the reviews he sent over. So we'll get right into those reviews for you. Stuff I haven't read at all. So this is purely his thing, and I can't comment on them other than, weird opinions. We're going to begin with Reincarnation, a LitRPG gamelit novel, last born of the Kid Darth trilogy, written by Timothy M. McGowan. Ian, he enjoyed it. He gives it a score of 7.6 out of 10. And for people who... Ian's review scores are generally about one note above. So his 8s are usually my 7s, and his 7s are usually like my 6s. Just to give you like a basis of but if Ian says to 7.6, he means he really enjoyed it. It's just that if I had read it, I may not have as much. And that's the general statement. But Ian said, superhero kitty. The thought of the heroic kitty angle was cool. The dying world aspect was a detractor for me. I'm generally not a fan of apocalypse stories. See, that's where we're different. I liked the adventure overall and the creative uses of environmental elements. Bonus points for explosions. I agree there. I like my booms. Kitty Rambo on a desert planet trying to save the girl with his system companion, all the while trying to get clean. It had LitRPG structure. I'm not sure what that means, to be honest. I'm not sure if that was I guess technically there's a LitRPG thing here. It had a LitRPG structure, or that's just a general statement of this absolutely had a LitRPG structure. That's unclear. I know which way I want to take it, though. It was a quick, enjoyable read for me. I'll definitely read book 2 when it comes out. And this has a score of 7.6 out of 10. A lot of other reviews, I don't think enjoyed it quite as much, but again, I haven't read it all, so I can't speak of it personally, but I know that I enjoyed it enough to give it a 7.6 out of 10. Okay, on to our next one. It's going to be Shadowbound Ghostlight Academy book number 1, written by Gage Lee. And these next 2 books are actually books I haven't read. These are a little more cultivation elements of it, which I really enjoy. He's a much bigger fan of cultivation stories than I am. I like cultivation stories when they have a real solid RPG progression system as well. So stuff like the Divine Dungeon series, the one by CM Carney, I forget what the name of it is, but all those stories have like really in-depth, like really clear progression systems that are RPG based. And if a cultivation system doesn't have that for me, I'm usually less interested in it. But that's a personal opinion. Ian's review of Shadowbound was this. He says, Kai the Miner. Pretty smart for a teenager. This one had some interesting fights near the end. The MC was somewhere between a TF2 engineer and Team Fortress 2 engineer and a tabletop martial artist. The story was simple and fun. The limited world worked pretty well here. I'm not sure where this goes from here. The book world works well as a standalone novel. So he gives it a score of 8.2 out of 10. So he really did enjoy this. And last but not least from Ian this week is going to be Gage Lee's Burning Cores, the last books from the same author. And he says, enjoy Jace and friends adventuring again. This was pretty good reading, a lot of adventure, mostly action at a fairly high pace. Good reading for a first-person book. I'm glad Jace didn't get bogged down with introspection. Jace, Eric, Abby, and Clem made for a good crew with enough detail and quirks to bring them to life. And he gives it a score of 8.0 out of 10. So there we go. Those are 3 reviews from our correspondent Ian Mitchell, and that ends Ian's Picks of the Week. Okay, folks, that is it. The show is done. Thank you very much for listening, for watching, for hanging out with us. Remember, you can follow us on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, Patreon, our website, LitRPGPodcast.com. A bunch of ways to follow the podcast and get our latest reviews every single week, and also our written list of all the stuff that's come out and all the stuff that's upcoming and all the new audiobooks. I go through those Audible and Amazon every single week for you guys and for myself to track the stuff that's new and upcoming, so we can all plan our reading schedule, just see what's coming out and in anticipation. Remember, if you enjoy the podcast in any way, shape, or form, you want to make sure to support us. You can find all the ways to help us at LitRPGPodcast.com/support. Help keep the podcast free and ad-free. And maybe someday we'll actually take ads where it's like, oh, some publisher or some company wants to give us money to show off their book. Who knows? Might be a way to help cover those costs as well. But until we can hang on again, ladies and gentlemen, remember to go read some LitRPG. Goodbye, everybody.